Well, after months of being tied to the home, Bahamians are now back in the workplace. But how do we adjust in these COVID-19 times? Well, my first guest is Denise Barnes, who is representing the Bahamas Society for Human Resource Management. Welcome to the Reid Factor.
Thank you very much, Julian.
COVID-19 times, we're coming back to work. What should every workplace have prepared for their workers as they come back?
Right. Well, there's a number of things, of course, that's going to change. And I think that as we were speaking a little bit before we got started, I quite frankly am happy about a number of changes because we're now doing things that we probably should have been doing for a while. One of the things, though, that's priority is the whole health and safety component of employees and the customers. So there should be the temperature checks, making sure there's floor markings for social distancing, the sanitization, not just the cleanliness, but making sure that the workspace is actually sanitized, the reduction of touch points, things that you really shouldn't have to touch and multiple people having to touch. Those are the things that employers and employees should be concerned about right now.
And I guess the challenge is sustaining it as well, because you're now hearing now that the COVID-19 virus could be on a surface for maybe a couple of days, from anywhere from a couple of hours to a couple of days.
Right.
So that means constantly dealing with doorknobs, etc.
Exactly. So not just dealing with the hard surfaces like doorknobs, but even, as a culture, we have a tendency to hug and kiss and everything else. And that is something, especially now that we've not seen each other for a long time, it's almost automatic. You're programmed to go and hug and kiss, but we need to make sure that at all times we are wearing the face masks and we are refraining from doing that whole physical interaction, especially with persons outside of your family or outside of your household. And so when you come to work, yes, you've worked together for the last 10, 15 years, but we're still asking people to refrain from doing those kind of intimate contacts.
So what are the real rights and duties and responsibilities of both employers and employees? Because it is on both sides.
Right. Well, keep in mind now that there's going to be a lot of changes happening, right? So we're going to move away from people having to be in the office space to where practicable that they can work from home. So it's going to be the really up to the employers to determine which roles can be done from home, and then those employees set up from a technology point of view to be able to do what is required of them from home. Now, when that happens, the employee now must be cognizant of the fact that you can't have the people laptop or devices just laying about on the kitchen table exposed to your cousin and everybody else who comes to the house, or you can't have your 5-year-old playing with all the buttons and the knobs. So the level of responsibility of, like you said, is on both sides in terms of the employer determining what should and should not be done in the physical workplace and what should be done outside. What are the protocols now? Because there are certain companies, of course, that you can't even get on their networks unless you're in the workplace. Now that they may be relaxing that or changing those protocols, employees now have a responsibility to the employer to only use those network access when they should. All right? So you can't get your feelings hurt if in some cases employees have decided either to shut off network access at certain times or even to certain individuals. If you're not working, then certainly the employers have a right to do that. The safety, of course, of the employees rests solely on the employer, certainly in my opinion, but then the employees must also consistently follow the protocols that the employers have put in place.
Well, of course, before we didn't know much about Zoom, but everyone knows about it now. But I think what you were getting at too was that maybe we should look a little bit more at working from home, wherever possible, and flexi time. And now a lot of businesses were doing that before, but definitely not the majority, and definitely not in government.
Right.
And do you think that's something that would be more practical and lead to more productivity at the end of the day?
And my answer is yes. And to qualify it, what I'm thinking is that I've had an opportunity to work in other countries, and in those countries where practical, again, people spend probably 2-3 days in the hard office because you may have meetings and everything. But like you've just said, in the age of Zoom, you don't even have to be face to face for meetings. all right? And then when it comes to productivity, if you've said to employee A, I need you to get X, Y, and Z done by such a time, whether they're in the office or home, if they have all the tools necessary to get that responsibility done or the task done, then why do they need to be in the workplace? So it's a pretty much old school philosophy that you have to show up to work and you have to be there for 8 or 9 hours, when half the time, you may be by the water cooler making that 10th cup of coffee or having breakfast for the second time, all right?
I'm there, but I'm really ripping you off time-wise.
Exactly, all right? So once there's a level of trust, and of course, honesty on the part of the employee, then I think that we're going to see a whole lot more flexi time in the workplace, but it has to be a lot of trust going on.
Now, I really should have asked you to tell a little bit more about the Bahamas Society for Human Resource Management, which used to be BHRDA, right? For example, if businesses that aren't too sure about how they should be doing HR matters in the workplace during COVID-19 times, would your organization be the one to come to for advice?
I believe so, because the organization, and let me just use somewhat of a disclaimer, I've only been back home for a short period of time, but what I am very proud about is that the organization is being run by qualified young people with a lot of cutting edge ideas. They're very much into what is the world standard, what is the world doing, and so they're not just so insular in terms of the way that they're operating. So certainly if someone is not too sure about how and what to do, certainly if they were to reach out to BSHRM, they would get the right information, and there's more than enough of talented individuals there that if you contact this individual, I'm sure that they will be able to refer you to other people, who has the answers.
I don't mean to embarrass you now, but you did work for Heineken.
Yes.
In Holland for a number of years, and then in Laos, which is amazing. What would you like to see from what you've learned, being in that other side of the world?
Right.
What would you like to see Bahamianism adapt to, from as far as that's concerned, particularly now that we have an opportunity to change things?
Well, this whole idea of leaves is very interesting to me. I remember when I was in the Netherlands for a period of years, there was really no such thing as pre-established sick leave, all right, or days. And that was because the work ethics of the employees was so high. If they said that they were sick, they were genuinely sick. There was no kind of rigmarole, as we would say in Bahamian vernacular, about checking off this and which doctor you've been to and all of that. No, if you were out sick, you were out sick. So when we look at policies and procedures at home, I just wish that there were some things that we could look at that were more people-centric, giving people the responsibility. We talk about empowerment, but then we put so much rules and regulations around that empowerment that it really isn't empowerment. You still have to follow the guidelines. And what I found both in the Netherlands and in Laos, mind you, was that a lot of the responsibility was placed on the person. How responsible are you? How ethical are you? And sometimes people don't step up to the plate because there's no plate established. All right.
So really, what you're talking about is being grown-ups.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Got to be grown-ups is what they.
Yes, it is.
And that's how they function,
yes,
and they get more done.
Yes.
When we talk about other aspects of coming back to work, now we know that people who may have been home for a long time, it's not easy being home in many cases. We don't know what the home life is like all the time.
Right.
But when they come back and bring some of the stress, the pain, whatever, back to the workplace.
Right.
Like, are you hearing about people bullying people? And we know bullying can be a whole bunch of different things.
Right.
It's not just for kids on the playground.
Right. Well, what's actually, I think, happening in some organizations is that we have individuals who are not comfortable yet returning to work, all right? And they have a right to express the fact that they're not comfortable. And from what I've heard, employers are being quite appropriate and decent with it because they don't want people to come back to work if they're not safe as yet. So of course the responsibility is on the employers to ensure that their team members know that the environment to which they're returning is being sanitized and the appropriate protocols are put in place. However, if a person doesn't want to come back to work, that's not for their colleagues to then kind of make fun of them or throw jeers or whatever it is. You know, we just need to be careful about that, and hopefully a lot of employees, if they haven't already done so, would really put in place robust employee assistance programs where people have that confidential telephone number that they can use, or email address, or even Zoom calls now with going and finding out, I'm really concerned about this for me and my family, what do I do about it? All right, and of course it may be a matter of bullying. The other thing that is a little bit about bullying and not necessarily bullying is that we are now, I'm sure, going to have reduced number of people doing certain things, right? That doesn't mean that we take advantage of those employees. All right, the person still has to have some downtime. They still have to have some recovery time. One of the things you talked about was one of the things I learned in the Netherlands, I believe, is that they're very strong about work-life balance. Okay, you don't have to go to work or be to work for hours and hours and hours to be a great employee. You can work from home some days, or you can have reduced hours, and you can still be a great employee. It's all about the productivity, it's all about the output. And so don't make someone feel less than if they're unable to be in the office every day, all day, for extended periods of time.
Now, as we speak, Freeport is just finding out that they're on lockdown. Boom. What advice would you give for them to get through times like this? And hopefully New Providence won't go through a lockdown like that again.
Right.
But to go back through it is also another adjustment period.
Right. Well, I think that certainly for the employers right now should really rethink everything they do in terms of all of their ways of working. And anybody who knows me now know that that's something I'm a huge advocate of. What is a way of working? Because you've been doing it for 20 years doesn't necessarily make it right. So this is a perfect opportunity to look at every possible thing that you've been doing in that workplace and revise it so that there's, like I said, less contact, less interaction, and more productivity. All right, so that's one thing. The second thing is that, is certainly for even people in Freeport or Grand Bahama, is that what are you doing about yourself? Because this may now be a time for you to think about, is the job that I go to every day really the job that I want? And if it isn't, this is an opportune time for you to upskill yourself for the jobs that you do want. And then of course there's a whole concept of entrepreneurship. Right? Why aren't we hopefully suggesting that more people not just be or return to work or be employees again, but why not live out that dream that you've been working on or certainly thinking about for a number of years? This is the time to take the risk, because really ain't no work to go to, so you might as well take the risk and try some things, right? And really just develop your competencies as an individual and make you the better person that you probably always wanted to be.
That's amazing. Anything else you want to tell us before we break? As far as working during COVID-19 times?
Well, I think that a recognition that we are in a very sensitive time, that there's a lot of hypersensitivity going on, and it's real. All right, and we're going to probably come against some people, whether it's customers or fellow colleagues, who don't believe that COVID-19 is real, or who don't believe that you should be wearing masks. So I think that people just need to really make sure, keep themselves protected, understand that it's all about self-protection and protecting their families. So what other people want to do, don't get into a fight about it, don't get into an argument. Protect yourself emotionally and physically. That's one of the things I think I would like to leave with people.
Denise Barnes, thank you for being on the Reid Factor, and
thank
good
you
to see
very
you
much.
after so many years.
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay. We're going to have more for you right after this. Welcome back. Being home for 4 months and coming back to work really isn't easy for some people, particularly if your kids and other family members are still at home. Part of you might still be at home. Joining us now is Dr. Wayne Thompson, a relationship expert, whom you all know, I'm sure. How do we really adjust on the psychological and mental side of coming back to work during COVID-19 times? Because as we know what's going on, the numbers are pouring in Freeport and here.
And it's
so it's still here.
It's still here, and everything is still dynamic and moving. So the adjustment is a little bit more difficult and tedious because this is a new road we've never been before, and nothing is etched in stone. For example, parents aren't fully sure yet about the school year. Having to return to work and children have to work from home and they aren't home to provide the supervision that teachers would have provided increases the stress. And so many parents who have re-entered work are psychologically distracted to some extent because of the home environment.
Even if they're working reduced hours, right?
Even if they are working reduced hours. So even if they come into the office for 4 hours, leaving 2 to 4 children at home alone for 4 hours will create stress because persons of that age, when we're speaking about 8 to 14, are still in need of supervision. And if left to their own, there's a high tendency to drift. So that's one level of stress. Now, 4 months away from work, getting comfortable or finding a comfort zone to work from home, then now having to have that uprooted, but not completely uprooted because you're still working at home and working at work. But for those who have to work in the office, it's important for us to recognize that there are natural anxieties that will come about. And one of the natural anxieties that will come about, what level of exposure am I up against? Okay, that's going to be one of the first things. What level of exposure?
Because some people will, and I don't want to say an abnormal fear, but they might develop an abnormal fear about touching anything or being around anyone.
That's exactly what I'm speaking about. So one of the priorities is going to be sanitization. Persons need to feel that sanitization is taking place on a consistent, regular basis. Secondly, persons must be given cleaning instruments to keep the environment healthy. Persons must recognize that even at work, social distancing is a necessity. And you know, when you miss someone for 4 months, you know our natural instinct.
Yeah, but also depending on the nature of your work, it could be a little difficult to social distance.
For some persons, you're absolutely correct. And so this is where leadership has to come into play, where logistics and everything has to be taken into consideration. This is why even shift scheduling, rather than just herding with everybody together at the same time, may have to become part of a new norm. For example, if you traditionally had 20 persons in a big room and they were on an average 2.5 to 3 feet apart, what that now says is that there may be a need to have 10 come in from 8 until noon, and then the other 10 come in from noon until 4, which means that now they have to have mobile equipment to access work. All of this creates stress, anxiety, because persons now have to remember additional things that ordinarily they would not have had to give thought to. And let me tell you, we want persons to know there's nothing wrong if your anxieties flare up. What it simply means is you are feeling overwhelmed. You are feeling as if you are drowning because there are so many adjustments and so many things to catch up with. You can catch up to it if you don't panic. Rule number 1, when you feel...
Easier said than done, though, isn't it? Because when we hear, oh, all of a sudden 174 cases, There's a little bit of panic. I
Well,
don't care
that
who you
is
are.
going to create panic. But now, if you're going to survive, you can't stay in panic mode.
No.
Let's be clear with that. Because if you panic, your cognitive intelligence is going to drop 30% immediately. Hold on, 30%. That means you're going to start making foolish choices.
Some big mistakes, yeah.
And I'm very sorry, but if you look at the spike that has hit us, it is evident that some of our people made silly choices.
True, true, true. And it might be just not wearing masks or wearing them improperly, not being socially distant,
Yes.
pretending like it was gone.
Yes, and you know, magical thinking is a very serious thing in this time, because you cannot wish away something of this magnitude. As we can see to our wonderful neighbors to the north,
It didn't magically disappear.
a tremendous amount of magical thinking came into play, and now they have become global trendsetters for this disease.
Yeah, yeah.
And they have the most advanced medical scientists in the world. And so it's imperative that you adhere to the advice. But now, everything is not on the employer. The employee must also ensure that they do what is necessary to prepare themselves for work.
And give us some exercises that you could do to get yourself into the right
For
frame
example,
of mind.
I'm driving to work, I pulled up in the parking lot, I recognize my heart rate is elevating. This means that your anxieties are coming on. Don't start to say, oh my God, what is this now? No, that is going to exacerbate it. What you need to do is you need to pause and you need to acknowledge it. I'm having some concerns that are elevated. It's turning to anxiety. Rule number one, anxiety is not going to kill me. Rule number two, anxiety will not give me a stroke. Rule number three, anxiety will not give me a heart attack. Rule number four, this too shall pass. Secondly, if you're at your workstation and you're feeling overwhelmed, ball your fists, clasp both fists, squeeze them tightly and count to 3 and release it. Do that 10 times and all of the anxiety in the system will dissipate. Thirdly, if you know that you have a proclivity to worry more than normal, you need to reduce caffeine and white sugars immediately, because those things speed the system up. Well, anxiety already is going to turn you into a turbocharger. You do not want to become a super turbocharger.
True, true.
These are small steps that we can take every day to ensure that we are managing ourselves appropriately. Another step that we can take to help prepare ourselves properly for work is to recognize this is the season where we should be eating the colors of the rainbow more than any other time, because the colors of the rainbow are all absorbed by the brain, which is the center that will assist the central nervous system in managing those depressing, those anxious moments that come about. Brown food does not send anything to the brain. Brown food is simply for the satisfaction of the gut. These are simple adjustments that we can make to see to it that we survive. And we must understand this as well. Stop feeding on negativity. I am so sorry, but we seem...
And a lot of that could happen in the workplace.
Julian, a lot of that happens daily in the workplace, and it is impacting productivity.
Let me ask you another question that I asked our previous guest, the HR specialist.
Yes.
What are your thoughts about bullying in the workplace? And are you hearing of any instances of that since people have started going back to work?
Bullying is absolutely real, and the answer to that is yes. So I've had calls where actually during the period of time when persons should not be at work unless they were basically essential. In one establishment, there was one leader who actually telephoned his team so much that the stress and disruption that it brought to their family life caused those persons to come to work. That actually is bullying. And you have bullying that takes place in the workplace in many different facets. For example, some of our managers want the people to come to work because they specialize in micromanaging people. Well, the research shows that micromanaging people guarantees that productivity will be low. And I think that this is one of the reasons why we are not as productive as we ought to be. I am very sorry. We need to stop using antiquated leadership management approaches to how you deal with people.
And now's a good time to actually try and change. I don't mean to cut you off because I know you and I could talk forever, but I want to get a couple of things in,
Sure.
and we have like about a minute or so left.
Yeah.
Should in the workplace be a sort of center for mental health or psychosocial support
Yes.
in the workplace? There should be.
And I think that what that will do is that will even help to send the message more clearly that there isn't a need for anyone to be feeling uneasy regarding mental health issues. Mental health is real. I believe, Julian, that from Dorian, the level of sensitivity and awareness increased a bit because we had a tremendous amount of that taking place. COVID-19 is now revealing that mental health is a very real thing, and all of us cope and manage things differently.
Yeah.
The manner in which you were raised determines how you actually cope to circumstances and situations. Unfortunately, for many adults in the work environment, they were not spoken to in a positive manner. The traditional way to speak to a child in this country is to talk down to them. And so all of this creates a easy sense of discouragement.
And really takes away from what your objective is, just to get things done.
Thank you.
All right. Listen, Dr. Thompson,
Oh,
always
man.
good to see you, man. I'm sorry
Beautiful,
that we
man.
got to break up now, but
Yes.
that's the end of our show. So we hope we've offered you some good pieces of advice as to how to make it a little bit better in the workplace during COVID-19. And keep still and keep yourself together. And we'll see you next time on The Reid Factor. It's good to see you again.
It's wonderful.